Thank you.
Huh? A very good evening to all. Is it? It's not working. Now. As we enter into the second plenary session of the seminar, I again welcome you all to the International Seminar on Gandhi and His Critics, a contemporary discourse organized by Gandhi Study Circle of Aryabhat College, University of Delhi, in collaboration with Political Science Department of the college and supported by ICPR. This seminar provides a platform where we gather to explore the enduring legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, his principles, and his critics. It gives us an opportunity to delve into the intersectionality of Gandhian discourse and engage with its contemporary relevance. For this plenary session on the theme Gandhi on Violence and War, we have with us our distinguished panel of guest speakers, Professor Sugata Bose and Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. For our discussant, we have with us Dr. Tarang Kapoor, and as the chairperson, we have with us Professor Ashok Acharya. So allow me to introduce the discussant and the chairperson first. Dr. Tarang Kapoor taught as an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at Daulat College, University of Delhi, for more than 6 years. Prior to this, she worked as a university teaching assistant in the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, an undergraduate student from Lady Shri Ram College, and a postgraduate from Hindu College. Dr. Kapoor was awarded Indian Philosophical Congress Medal. Also, she was awarded Junior and Senior Research Fellowship by University Grand Commission India during the course of a PhD from University of Delhi. For her dissertation title, Ludwig Wittgenstein's Philosophy and Debate on Moral Absolutism and Moral Relativism, she visited Department of Philosophy, Carleton University, Canada, as a visiting scholar. Her research interests include metaethics, issues in applied ethics and bioethics, ethical theory, feminism, exploration of themes and methodology of early and later Wittgenstein Philosophical Council and philosophy in practice, human rights, and among others. So I would request Anushka, the Joint Secretary of Gandhi Study Circle, to felicitate Dr. Kapoor. Now I'm delighted to introduce our chair for the plenary session, Professor Ashok Acharya. Professor Acharya is professor in the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi, and Global Justice Fellow, Yale University. He received his PhD from University of Toronto. He is the co-editor of Political Theory and Introduction and editor of Citizenship in a Globalizing World. Besides publishing articles in area of multiculturalism, social justice, and affirmative action, he has been a recipient of Commonwealth Scholarship for Doctoral Studies, a fellow at Australian Social Science Academy, Canberra, the India Fellow at the University of Birmingham, UK, and has also held the Henry Hart Rice Visiting Professorship at Yale University for the year 2012 to 2013. His areas of research interest include comparative and contemporary political theory, ethics and politics, and themes surrounding global and social justice. He has led the interdisciplinary Nyay Global Justice Research Program at the University of Delhi in partnership with various global institutions and with generous funding from the British Council. He presently leads the Center for Ethics, Politics, and Global Affairs as its director and its joint director of the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs, University of Delhi, under the Institution of Eminence. I would request Sanya, the president of Gandhi Study Circle, to felicitate Professor Acharya. Now we have with us our guest speakers who have joined us online, Professor Sugata Bose. Professor, yes, sir. Okay, it's working on it. Okay, so we have with us Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is a historian and a biographer involved in efforts of trust building and reconciliation. He currently serves as research professor at College of Education, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. From 1997 to 2012, he was part of this university's Center for South Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. Rajmohan Gandhi, sir, has authored more than a dozen books. His latest book, published in December 2018, is Modern South India, a history from 17th century to our times. Other books by him includes Understanding the Muslim Mind, Gandhi, the Man, His People and the Empire, Punjab, a history from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten, Patel, a life, and Understanding the Founding Fathers, an inquiry into the beginnings of Indian Republic. In 2002, he received the Sahitya Academy Award for his Rajaji, a life, a biography of Chakravarti Rajgopalachari. From 1990 to 1992, Rajmohan was a member of Rajya Sabha, the upper house of the Indian Parliament. Earlier in 1990, he led the Indian delegation to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva, associated from 1956 with the Initiatives of Change, formerly known as Moral Rearmament. Rajmohan Gandhi served as a president of Initiatives of Change International in 2009 and 2010. Through his writings, speaking, public interventions, and dialogues, he has been engaged for 60 years in efforts of reconciliation, democratic rights. In 1960s and early 1970s, he played a leading role in establishing Asia Plateau, the 68-acre center of Initiative of Change in the mountain of Western India, which fosters dialogue, reconciliation, and ethical governance, and is recognized on the Indian subcontinent for its ecological contribution. During 1975 and 1977 emergency in India, he was active for democratic rights personally and through his weekly journal Himmat, published in Bombay from 1964 to 1981. India, Pakistan, and Hindu-Muslim reconciliation have remained his goals since. Since 9/11, he has also tried to address the divide between the West and the world of Islam. Before teaching at the University of Illinois, he served as research professor with the New Delhi think tank, Center for Policy Research. From 1985 to 1987, he edited the Daily Indian Express in Madras. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my paper is called Gandhi's Theories and Strategies. Allow me first to comment on some points in the concept note that is circulated about this seminar. The note says, quote, "Though the Gandhian discourse has become popular all over the world, his disinterest in penning down his political ideas into a strictly theoretical framework has generated a lot of confusion and misunderstanding," unquote. It's true that in 1946, when he was asked to spell out his theory of satyagraha, Gandhi declined, saying he was made for action, not for expounding a theory. However, Gandhi's writings offer at least 3 theories. The first is the theory of non-violent resistance to oppression. As every student of Gandhi knows, he formed this theory in South Africa in 1906, applied it there to good effect, and then applied it in India, starting with Champaran, Bihar in 1917. After much of India took part in the resistance of 1930, which had begun with the Salt March, Churchill said in England that Indians had, quote, "inflicted such humiliation and defiance as has not been known since the British first trod the soil of India," unquote. On Gandhi's theory of nonviolent resistance, let me quote Professor James M. Lawson. In the 1950s and 1960s, James Lawson, who is now 95, was one of the closest colleagues of Martin Luther King Jr. In his latest book, entitled Revolutionary Nonviolence, unquote, published last year, Lawson writes, quote, "As Albert Einstein is the father of physics, so Gandhi of India is the father of nonviolence," unquote. The second theory that Gandhi offers is a theory of Indian nationhood. Here is what Gandhi writes in Hind Swaraj in 1909. This is 114 years ago. Quote, "India cannot cease to be one nation because people belonging to different religions live in it. In reality, there are as many religions as there are individuals. But those who are conscious of the spirit of nationality do not interfere with one another's religion." Continues Gandhi, "In no part of the world are one nationality and one religion synonymous, nor has it ever been so in India." He asks, is the God of the Muslim different from the God of the Hindu? There are deadly proverbs, Gandhi writes, as between the followers of Shiva and those of Vishnu, yet nobody suggests that these two do not belong to the same nation, unquote. This was Gandhi's theory of Indian nationhood in 1909. It remained his theory of Indian nationhood until his death. Gandhi's third theory, is of the individual's importance. In Hind Swaraj, he wrote that the individual satyagrahi would bend the knee before her own conscience, but not before tanks or empires. This remained Gandhi's truth from Hind Swaraj until his last days. About 2 weeks before he was killed, Gandhi said, 14th January 1948, quote, "Society is made up of individuals. It is we that make society. If one individual takes the initiative, others will follow, and one can become many. If there is not even one, there is nothing," unquote. Gandhi's theory of the individual was highlighted during a discussion that he had with Nehru after World War II ended. We have no record of these Gandhi-Nehru talks, but letters are available written at the time. Gandhi said he stood by his Hind Swaraj. Nehru said he stood by his disagreement with much of Hind Swaraj. Both admitted during this dialogue that they had no copy of Hind Swaraj to refer to. However, the two of them agreed on the importance of the individual. This is what Gandhi wrote to Nehru during this dialogue. "In the village of my dreams, the villager will not be dull, he will be all awareness. He will not live like an animal in filth and darkness. Men and women will live in freedom, prepared to face the whole world. There will be no plague, no cholera, no smallpox. Nobody will be allowed to be idle or to wallow in luxury. The individual person," Gandhi added, "should have control over the things necessary for the sustenance of life. If he cannot have such control, the individual cannot survive. Ultimately, the world is made up only of individuals," unquote. The freedom of the press, too, was only one aspect of the freedom of the individual. When in 1940, Gandhi was ordered by the British not to print in his journals the arrest of Vinoba Bhave, Gandhi suspended the publication of his journals. And this is what he wrote, quote, "Let everyone become his own walking newspaper and carry the good news from mouth to mouth. I can tell my neighbor what I have authentically heard. This no government can overtake or suppress. It is the cheapest newspaper yet devised, and it defies the wit of government, however clever it may be." Continues Gandhi, "Let these walking newspapers be sure of the news they give. They should not indulge in any idle gossip. They should make sure of the source of information, and they will find that the public gets all the information that they need without opening the morning newspaper." This is in Gandhi's journal Harijan, 3rd November 1940. We can see that Gandhi was anticipating in 1940 the social media of recent years. I don't need to say today that freedom of the press is a live issue currently. On questions of caste, interdining, and intermarriage, inconsistent quotes from Gandhi can easily be found. In most cases, the context explains the inconsistency. In South Africa, Gandhi seemed to be in favor of satyagraha on issues of caste. When he heard that an Indian satyagrahi in a South African prison had objected to sleeping near someone belonging to the scavenger caste, Gandhi termed the news humiliating. In his weekly Indian Opinion, this is what Gandhi wrote in the year 1909, quote, "Thanks to these hypocritical distinctions of high and low, and to the fear of subsequent caste tyranny, we have turned our back on truth and embraced falsehood. I wish that Indians who join this movement also resort to satyagraha against their caste and their family and against evil wherever they find it." This is in Indian Opinion, January 30, 1909. After returning to India in 1915, Gandhi was astonishingly radical given the nature of Indian society at that time, when he admitted Dalits into his Ahmedabad ashram, against objections from his wife Kasturba and other close associates. Later, however, in the 1920s and for much of the 1930s, Gandhi seemed unwilling to criticize the caste system as such. He spoke of an ideal Varna system different from caste, where there was distinctiveness but also equality, while simultaneously admitting that such a system was purely imaginary. Such a stand reveals Gandhi's wish not to completely alienate India's caste Hindus. He needed them for the freedom movement and for Hindu-Muslim friendship. From November 1935, however, after Gandhi had conducted a massive all-India campaign against untouchability, and after Ambedkar had sharply criticized him for not attacking the caste system directly, Gandhi changed his language. On 16th November 1935, quote, "Caste has to go," unquote, was the headline of an article Gandhi wrote in Harijan. 2 months later, on 19 January 1936, Gandhi wrote in Harijan Bandhu, his Gujarati journal, of, quote, "natural and meaningless restrictions on intermarriage and interdining," unquote. Gandhi added, "and that is why the country has stopped progressing," unquote. Now, this concept note for the seminar also states, quote, "Subhas Bose, his former colleague and fellow traveler, who declared Gandhi the father of the nation, elucidates in his autobiography, The Indian Struggle." Sorry, I'll start this again. Quote, concept note states, "Subhas Bose, his former colleague and fellow traveler, who declared him, Gandhi, the father of the nation, elucidates in his autobiography, The Indian Pilgrim, his utter disappointment with Gandhi on the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement," unquote. Now, anyone reading what I've just read would conclude that after first declaring Gandhi as the nation's father, Subhas Bose was later, quote, "utterly disappointed with Gandhi because of the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement." In fact, as anyone even slightly familiar with the chronology knows, the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement occurred in 1934, whereas Subhas Bose's radio broadcast from somewhere in Southeast Asia, addressed to Gandhi as the father of the nation, was made in July 1944, by which time the disappointment was a 10-year-old story. The sentences I've quoted from the concept note about Gandhi and Bose are immediately followed by this categorical assertion about Gandhi and Nehru, quote, "Later, Nehru had a fundamental disagreement with Gandhi on the issue of complete independence against Gandhi's approval of dominion status," unquote. Later here can only mean after the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement, that is after the year 1934. But the Gandhi-Nehru discussion over dominion status versus complete independence took place between 1927 and 1929, long before 1934, and the difference was fully resolved before the end of 1929. There is another statement in the concept note on which I should comment. Quote, "But Gandhi's difference of opinion with Subhas Bose snowballed into a historic But Gandhi's difference of opinion with Subhas Bose snowballed into a historic fell-out going beyond dialogue and reconciliation," unquote. I'm asking, was this really the case? It was in 1939 that India observed the famous Gandhi-Bose clash over Subhas Bose's wish to serve for another year as Congress president. But this clash was short-lived. In June 1940, a year after the clash, the two had a most cordial conversation, which Gandhi recounted in detail in the July 13, 1940 issue of his journal Harijan. The next year, in 1941, as everyone knows, Netaji escaped from house arrest in Kolkata and found his way first to Germany, then to Japan. In 1944, he delivered that radio broadcast addressed to Gandhi as the father of the nation. After Subhas Bose's death in 1945, some of his INA soldiers worked closely with Gandhi, including in Noakhali, which is now in Bangladesh. These facts suggest that there was nothing even remotely like a historic falling out that went beyond dialogue and reconciliation. Then there is this sentence in the concept note, quote, his religious philosophy, Hindu in orientation, was meant to be all accommodative and based on Sarvadharma Sambhav, equal respect for all religions, but he made Khilafat the central plank of his first mass movement in India, unquote. This is from the concept note. Now, although this opinion has been repeated almost ad nauseum, this opinion that Gandhi made, quote, Khilafat the central plank of his first movement, mass movement in India, unquote, has no basis in actual facts. It is only drummed up propaganda that many have come to believe. Recall the years 1919 and 1920, immediately following World War I. After decades of successful divide and rule policies, once the Jallianwala massacre had occurred in April 1919, the empire faced resentment from all Indians, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, everyone else. Moreover, India's Muslims, hitherto cautious about opposing the empire, had become deeply alienated from the British because of the successful war waged by Britain and France against Turkey, which was Germany's ally. This success of Britain and France signified European dominance over Islam's holy places in Arabia and Iraq, places that Turkey had controlled thus far. Gandhi realized, and he said publicly and repeatedly, that a chance which in his words, quote, might not recur for 100 years, unquote, had opened up for a strong Hindu-Muslim alliance for India's freedom. This remark was made by Gandhi at least 3 different times in August 1920 alone, and these can all be, I can give the references, 1920, collected works. Moreover, Lokmanya Tilak too, before his death in August 1920, blessed this Hindu-Muslim alliance. Quote, Hindus would support, unquote, Muslim decisions on Khilafat, Tilak said. Lala Lajpat Rai and hundreds of other staunch Hindus went to prison as part of this first mass movement. Would any of them have done so had Khilafat been the movement's central plank? The suggestion has no historical basis. Finally, let me speak on the insinuation that during his South African years, which began when Gandhi was 23 and ended when Gandhi was 44, Gandhi was some kind of a racist. When demanding rights for Indians in South Africa, Gandhi no doubt at times spoke disparagingly while making comparisons of the Africans living there. This was a real failing. However, no Indian at that time, in South Africa or in India, criticized Gandhi on this score. In fact, compared with other Indians then in South Africa, Gandhi was far more knowledgeable and far more concerned about Africans there. Moreover, 115 years ago, on 18th May 1908 in Johannesburg, South Africa, Gandhi presented a remarkable vision for all the races of South Africa in a speech he made at the YMCA in Johannesburg, which was published in Johannesburg's newspapers at that time Gandhi said, quote, "In studying the Indian question, I have also endeavored to study the question as it affects the Africans and the Chinese who were also there in South Africa." He continues, "We can hardly think of South Africa without the African races." He continues, quote, "If we look into the future, is it not a heritage we have to leave to posterity that all the different races commingle and produce a civilization that perhaps the world has not yet seen?" Unquote. This is in the year 1908. In that year, no other Indian, whether in South Africa or in India, presented a picture even remotely similar to what I have just quoted. In 1908, even non-Indians did not speak of, quote, "the commingling of races," as Gandhi spoke in 1908. Even in this year, 2023, how many speak of the commingling of the races? So even on race, Gandhi comes across as a kind of a pioneer with all his shortcomings. If we want to call Gandhi a racist, then let us be honest and say that other Indians at that time, whether living in South Africa or in India, were much more racist. So with this, I conclude, and I hope we can have a discussion, questions, and a conversation. Thank you very, very much. It's a great joy and a pleasure to me to speak at this seminar.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. It was indeed a huge pleasure and a great opportunity for many of us to be able to listen to you, even if you are, sitting far away. But, you are connecting with each one of us here. And should we take the questions now, Satish? Yes. Okay. So we will just come to you. Yeah. No, we will do it now. So I invite my colleague, Dr. Tarang Kapoor, to as a discussant to set some your talk, and then we will invite others to raise questions. I'm right? We can do that. Right. Okay. Dr. Tarang Kapoor.
Hello, am I audible? Thank you, Professor Gandhi. I would like to make a philosophical intervention here with respect to the nature of non-violence present in Gandhi. As all of us have been discussing since morning, that Gandhi laid huge emphasis on individual satyagraha. There are, of course, prerequisites of being a satyagrahi, non-violence being the foremost prerequisite. Non-violence here is not seen in opposition to violence, and non-violence goes beyond just being presenting a binary opposition to violence. So it goes in terms of equality and welfare for all. It goes in terms of making positive interventions, in terms of compassion, respecting the other as an individual person. And I think when Gandhi talks about non-violence, he is bringing in the whole idea, the capacity, if I may call it, capacity of each one of us to be able to dig into our soul force and realize our true potential, our true nature as individuals. We have seen since the advent of modernity so much emphasis being laid on the material dimension of our being. How most of the time the concern is about the body and the needs of the body, and trying to satisfy the needs of our social needs, physical, emotional, economical. So all kinds of necessities of body have been capitalized by the market and by us as society. But Gandhi actually invokes this whole idea of non-violence in terms of resisting and pushing our own self so that we can achieve our own true potential in terms of purity of ourselves as true beings. And in this sense, when Professor Gandhi just spoke about when one person becomes free, that person presents an exemplar or becomes an example for others to follow. This is not to say that, you know, one is doing something and others are just blindly doing that one person. It is in terms of, I see it as a engaged present in Gandhi. So in Vedanta, all of us know that it is about Brahman and everybody being Brahman. So there is no sense of one being trying to be equivalent to Brahman or trying to learn some thing from someone else in terms of trying to imitate or superficially wanting to be something else. So that one thing about resistance as a soul force against this brute force of materiality. Another important point of individual satyagraha, when one can raise their own conscience and in turn make others realize that they should be doing the same. And in all of this, freedom being the central theme present in Gandhi, and so central, so much so that it is the most revolutionary idea of freedom present in Gandhi. In terms that his life itself becomes an example of how to live with true sense of freedom. So with this, I will have one particular question from Professor Gandhi on Varna system, which I thought that we can take in the question answer. If you would like to elaborate on the distinction which you just drew between individual identity being maintained, at the same time distinction being maintained in terms of diversity of the Varna categorization to which the individual will belong. So how is Gandhi able to ensure this through his Varna system?
So may I respond to this?
Please, yes, you may.
Okay, so thank you. First of all, I appreciate your comments very much, Professor, for your earlier comments also very much. I appreciated those. On the question of Varna, as I have indicated in my short remarks, Gandhi for some time defended the Varna system. And in Gandhi's description of this Varna system, which was an idealized description, he felt that people were distinct and different, yet they were equal. So he believed in distinctiveness, but also equality. However, Gandhi always added, whenever he spoke about the Varna system, that this system that he described did not exist on the ground. So this is something important we must recognize. Gandhi is defending something, but he admits that this something, this ideal arrangement, does not exist on the ground. So you know that I titled my paper, Gandhi's Theories and Strategies. So Gandhi's comments on the Varna system I regard as his strategy, because he needs to carry the great majority of India's caste Hindus with him. He cannot carry them with him if he denounces the Varna system, the caste system as such. Gandhi presents an ideal version, and he says if such an ideal version exists, then we can defend it. But he says it does not exist. So this is my take, that Gandhi's description of the Varna system is of an ideal kind, not of what exists on the ground. And in my assessment, others may disagree with it, in my assessment, Gandhi makes this defense as a strategy because he has to carry all the Hindus with him for his goal of independence, for his goal of Hindu-Muslim unity, and for his goal of abolishing untouchability.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Please introduce yourself.
Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, this is Gange Mukherjee.
Hello, good to meet you again.
Thank you, sir. The honor is mine, although it is over long distance.
It is.
You might remember that we crossed swords last. I mean, as puny as my sword was about your comment on strategy.
Your sword was very sharp.
I would like to ask you, sir, given Gandhi's constant, his lifelong goal, as he said, to meet his maker, that is, you may, obviously the definition is of moksha, of liberation. I forget, you might remember, you will remember, as late as perhaps in the late 1940s, there is a letter to Sardar Patel where he says that Ambedkar is not to be trusted, that they had some kind of a mutual conversation, Sardar Patel and Ambedkar, and he says that it is not that Ambedkar is deceitful, but Ambedkar might prove to be fickle. These are not Gandhi's words, these are my impression. But Gandhi says, of course, that we can't depend on him. My question is, sir, that being the intensely spiritual person that Gandhi was, I had a conversation with Gopal Guru a couple of years back over this. Did he not feel, or could he not feel, or did he not recognize, or could he not recognize that behind Ambedkar's angst with the entire social system might have been Ambedkar's also metaphysical desire for liberation? And the very fact that the Vedic religion denied the Shudra the right, the sacrificial right, which could be part of moksha, to be a seminal angst in Ambedkar. Of course, Gandhi being a Vaishnav, he would say that devotion trumps all. But could he not recognize in Ambedkar, or was there not in Ambedkar an aspiration of the soul also, along with the genuine angst at what the social system obtained in India at that time? This is my question to you, sir. It has been troubling me. It's a very personal, long-standing question.
Thank you. This is a great question indeed. And I would try to respond to it in this way. Both Gandhi and Ambedkar had great, you might say, political goals, as well as very great spiritual urges and hungers. Both Gandhi and Ambedkar had very strong political goals, as well as very deep spiritual hungers and desires. You're absolutely right there. And they had their differences. Publicly and privately, Ambedkar had used very sharp words about Gandhi. Gandhi also, in the letter that you have quoted, told Sardar Patel that Ambedkar cannot be trusted. This had to do with some seat adjustments for elections, that correspondence. But we all know, it is a matter of record and knowledge, that Gandhi urged Nehru and Patel to invite Ambedkar to be a minister and to take a leading part in the writing of the Constitution. And Ambedkar agreed. So with all their criticisms of each other, privately, publicly, they became wonderful collaborators. And what an amazing thing happened. That Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, brilliant scholar, was invited by, majority of them were high caste Hindus, to be the leading figure in drafting the Indian Constitution. I mean, it is a fantastic part of India's history, and we should recognize the wonder of it. And so I think, and you're absolutely right, that Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and his, in what he wrote about Buddhism and about giving up Hinduism, his spiritual hunger also comes across. And the amazing thing about Dr. Ambedkar also is that while using very sharp language about the injustices that he saw in Indian society, he still expected and had noticed that many so-called high caste Hindus were also fighting passionately for justice. He wanted all caste Hindus to do that, but give him the credit that he recognized and appreciated that many caste Hindus were also fighting for social justice. But I appreciate, Dr. Gange Mukherjee, your wonderful point, which is, I think, true really for all of us. We should not feel that any individual only has one goal. There are many hungers and desires in our hearts and souls. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Gandhi. We have amongst us, Professor Douglas Allen. Professor Allen, would you like to
Yes.
join the conversation?
Okay, let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Yes. Well, welcome, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. And I would like to just make two comments on what you said, and then I would like to ask you a question where I think you have done such valuable work that I feel is more needed today than ever. So my first comment is, most of your presentation, you went through the concept notes.
Yeah.
And you basically corrected them and indicated why, especially from Gandhiji's point of view, why historically the concept notes were often inaccurate or not justified. And I read the concept notes differently for this international seminar on Gandhi and his critics. So for me, I tended to agree with 90% of what you said. But for me, in terms of the seminar, these are positions that critics have had. And what I welcome for this international seminar is open debate, disagreements, and so forth in bringing together Gandhi supporters and Gandhi critics, and even more especially trying to look at the historical record, but then reconceptualize, reimagine it today in new creative ways that we can bring together the strengths and weaknesses of the Gandhian and non-Gandhian and anti-Gandhian positions that speak to our contemporary situation. The second comment was that you talked on Gandhi's theoretical contributions, and especially the third on the importance of the individual. And I agree, you can quote Gandhi at length on this, and Gandhi is very insightful. My only comment is I think that people misinterpret that when Gandhi talks about the individual, he is not talking about the dominant Western, modern, I, me, separate, ego-defined and ego-attached individual. Gandhi has in mind morally, spiritually, socially, ontologically, a very different view of the individual, in which there is no individual without integral relation with the other. The other is not simply not self. And so, and I think I'll just say some of what Gandhi said about the individual to me is needed and insightful, but I would suggest some of it is also a little muddle-headed and kind of limited relevance if we're trying to contextualize this in terms of the world in which we are living today and how Gandhi's insights can be most valuable. So the question I have for you is this. I think you have done such wonderful work. I'm thinking especially after Ayodhya, the Babri Masjid destruction, the Sabarmati train massacre, and you came out and pointed out the horrors of what was happening in India and the world, and how Gandhi's insights were urgently and desperately needed. So my question for you is today, could you comment on this? Because in my work, I feel many today with power in India, for example, use Gandhi, but they misuse Gandhi. And they misuse Gandhi for anti-Gandhian values, purposes, objectives, policies, because Gandhi's name, his icon, his mass appeal is very great. So I wonder if you would comment a little bit on your approach in that regard to what's happening and how Gandhi is being used and misused and is urgently needed today in India.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Allen, very much. It's an honor to meet you and to listen to your comments and also to your question. It is true that in my paper, which I will also send to the seminar's organizers, I have taken the trouble to point out what to me were some errors in the concept note. After all, these are important documents which will be there for a long time. And if I find some real errors, it is my duty as a scholar to point them out. And so and you yourself said that you are inclined to agree with 90% of the corrections that I have been bold enough to offer. So, because after all, there's so many questions involved in this conversation. One, how is Gandhi to be assessed? Did he really make Khilafat the central plank of his first mass movement? Yes, many people believe that because propaganda has a tremendous power. But I have ventured to show that that was not the case. Tilak and Lajpat Rai and thousands of other Hindus would not have joined the movement if Khilafat had been the central plank. Yes, but as I say, Gandhi was, yes, he had a spiritual side to him. Also, the concept note says that Gandhi really offered no theory. So at least that's the implication. Or that his theory. So I say that there are these three theories: nonviolent resistance, Indian nationhood, and the power of the individuals. But your question, but I totally agree, sir, that there should be a free debate on what Gandhi stood for. I absolutely believe in that, and there should be complete willingness to criticize him. But the criticism should be based on facts. I would absolutely welcome it. So that is my attitude on criticizing Gandhi. I am not against it. I'm for it. I'm for criticizing, freedom to criticize everybody. And while it is true that Gandhi's concept of individual freedom may differ from many Western concepts of individual freedom, there are many aspects on which the Western world and Gandhi agree on freedom. For instance, when Gandhi wants the freedom of the press, he wants it in the same way in which Americans want it, Canadians want it, Brits want it, Germans want it, Australians want it, all over the world. So Gandhi at times is using, you might say, some concepts in a very personal or special sense, but often he is using it in a widely accepted sense in the world. So, as for the situation in India today, to which you invite my comment, sadly, I agree with the view, which is held by so many people, both within India and outside, that there is great distress. We have to be concerned, we have the need to be greatly troubled at the lack of trust within India, at the increase in hate speech, at the curbs on individual liberty. And this is not a criticism of the government as such, but it is a reflection on where India is today, and the polarization, or putting it in a very simple way, unsatisfactory but a simple way. Many of us in India, this is true, by the way, also of the world as a whole, we think of ourselves as members of groups. We are this, I'm this caste, I'm of this race, I'm of this religion. And there are people of other castes, other religions, other races, other ethnicities. We have opinions about other groups. We don't have knowledge about other groups. We have opinions about other groups. We don't have knowledge about other groups. We don't read what they write. We don't meet them. We don't listen to them. They live in their worlds. We live in our worlds. So we have got to have dialogue, listening, criticism, yes, but trust also where it can be established, and participate. We are together in this boat, and we have to somehow live together. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have time for maybe just one small question, maybe. Just one question, yes, please. No, not you? Okay. You have one question, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Professor Gandhi. I am Mohan Singh Hania. I have been a student of political science, not an academician though. I have a question. As I understood Gandhi, you have talked about his theory of non-violence. And as I understand his theory of non-violence, and it was based on his theory of truth. As our Shastras say, truth is one, and the wise talk of it differently. So Gandhi believed that if we stick to truth, eventually everyone will come around to it, and violence should have no place in our discourses. And that was his theory of truth and non-violence considered together. And that he applied to his freedom struggle also. And in that process, you talked about his theory of nation. And to him, it was the truth that all the people who are born in India are Indians. So they will behave like one nation. But later on in course of the freedom movement, when the Hindus and Muslims started to diverge and the theory of separate nation was raised and India was finally partitioned. Gandhi initially said that India will be partitioned over his dead body. Eventually, he had to agree to partition. So his theory of truth actually somehow was not realized into practice. Question is, why did he succumb to this when he had, his truth was that India is one country, it should not be partitioned. And he always stick to his theory of truth and non-violence. Eventually he, as his critics would say, abandoned this truth and accepted this untruth of partition. Was it because there was to be a cost to be paid in terms of violence? And so he adopted or he abandoned non-violence and in the process abandoned the truth also for the pragmatism of avoiding the violence? That is my question.
Well, thank you, sir, for a very important question indeed. It's a question really about Gandhi and he made this remark, it is true, in September 1940, I think it was. He made the remark in Bombay after the Jinnah's demand for Pakistan, which was in March 1940. I think in September of 1940, if I'm not mistaken, Gandhi made a statement saying that he would rather like to be killed than accept partition. He did say that. It is also true that in the end, although he was the last to accept partition, he did in the end accept it. He did not stand against it. And this question was asked to him in his lifetime. You said this, and now you are accepting it. So to which Gandhi's answer was something like this. I'm not saying that his answer should be accepted. There is absolutely no doubt. It has to be admitted that Gandhi said partition over my dead body once. In the end, he did not fast unto death against partition. He accepted it. So Gandhi can rightly be accused of saying that he did not quite stand by his pledge. That is historically, if nobody can deny that. And Gandhi himself would admit it. But let us also recognize this. Was there anybody who opposed partition as firmly as Gandhi did? You mentioned the two-nation theory. Jinnah advanced it in 1940, but many Hindus advanced it even earlier. Many Hindus and many Muslims said Hindus and Muslims cannot live together as equals or in peace. Gandhi said that they have to live together as equals and in peace. This was Gandhi's commitment. And he lived and worked. But when his close, by the way, as you know, Patel was the most enthusiastic about partition. Rajaji was very enthusiastic towards the end, and then Rajendra Babu and Nehru also agreed. The Hindus and Sikhs of Punjab wanted the partition of Punjab. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee wanted the partition of Bengal. Nobody opposed partition as firmly, as strongly as Gandhi did, except for Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. But you are right, Gandhi did not sacrifice himself. He believed, rightly or wrongly, that even if he were to fast unto death, that was not going to achieve an end to partition. So what Gandhi should have done or should not have done can be debated. We can criticize him for his judgments if we want to, but let us be historically accurate. Let us try and find out who opposed partition more passionately, more consistently than Gandhi did, and we will find very, very few people. And then when partition did happen, Gandhi worked for partnership, friendship, restoration of trust. And that work has to be continued in Pakistan, in India, between India and Pakistan. And by the way, there are these deep divisions in many parts of the world too.
Okay, all right. No, please. We have some people, basically I would want Satish to ask a question. And really after this, I would encourage the students to ask some questions. You are not asking any. Oh. Okay. All right. Yeah, quick.
Professor Gandhi, this is Satish Jha.
Ji haan.
Namaskar.
Good to meet.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The question is that you talked about theories, offered by Gandhi, and you mentioned three, aspects of his theory, and one of them was the nation.
Indian nationhood.
Yeah, other two I don't have problem, but the nationhood I have some reservation. It is fact that Gandhi is known as father of the nation, but was nation a central category in his thought? Because if you look at his writings, instead of nation, you find the usage of civilization. Because nation as a historical category was being used by many nationalists, and the most powerful discourse on nation was offered by Pandit Nehru, the discovery of India. And the kind of contestation which happened, because they were essentially challenging the British, ideologues were saying that nation is something Western, and a diverse society, India, can never become a nation, because there is no common memory. History is divided. There is no common historical memory. And Gandhi perhaps knew it, that it was very difficult terrain to prove this common memory among Indians. So therefore, he sidestepped this issue of nationhood in his discourse. Of course, in context of Indian national movement growing, he had no other option but to use this category. But was it a central feature of his thought? That is something debatable. So therefore, in three features which you have identified of his theory, other two I don't have any problem. But on nation, I think that one has to be slightly more circumspect.
So thank you, Dr. Jha. But let me respond in this way. I never said, nor do I say, that Gandhi had a theory of the Indian nation. I'm referring to Gandhi's theory of Indian nationhood. That who has equal rights in the Indian nation. Gandhi's theory was that all Hindus, Muslims, Christians, atheists, Buddhists, Jains, Jews, everybody living in India had an equal right to Indian nationhood. So I'm not referring to Gandhi's theory of the Indian nation or nation versus civilization, but Gandhi gave a very modern, up-to-date theory of who is it to whom the Indian nation belongs and who have the right to claim to be Indians. And this was Gandhi's theory from 1909 to 1948, that everyone in India, Jewish, Buddhist, Jain, Muslim, Christian, atheist, Hindu, had a right to be the protection of the Indian state and to claim India as her or his nation equally as every. This was a very, you might say, universal theory of nationhood, which Gandhi applied with conviction and passion throughout his life. Not Indian nation, Indian nationhood.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think we have our next speaker waiting for us. And thank you again, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. It is indeed a huge pleasure to listen to you. And personally, I'm listening to you after 25 years, at least more than 25 years. When you last spoke was at Nehu Shillong.
Oh,
I don't know if you recall that.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a time I joined the department then freshly, and I still carry some fond memories, though, you would have spoken in 1,000 other places since then. But I'm really struck by, as then as now, by the simplicity with which you have, framed the entire discourse around the questions of theories and strategies, though we may keep bickering, and Gandhi is a fertile ground for all kinds of bickering in any case. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining and for, making this a good event and to listen and talk about. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And you may, please, don't leave. We have another speaker coming in. So as long as we all join together and we don't leave, I know it's a little late in the evening, but, in the interest of that solidarity sponsored by Gandhi and so we all, please stay, please stay. Yes. I said that. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, if you're, yeah, he has left. Okay. Yeah. Professor Allen, I hope you would stay with us until, yes, thank you. So we have, you would be the Sugata Bose. So how many of you are here are students now from this college or from any other college? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. We will begin with you raising questions the next round. Okay.
So now we have with us. So now we have with us Professor Sugata Bose. So Professor Bose, welcome. Professor Bose's field of specialization is modern South Asian and Indian Ocean history. He obtained his PhD from the University of Cambridge. He is Gardner Chair of Oceanic History Affairs at Harvard University. He's a prolific writer and has a lot of publications to his credit. His books include His Majesty's Opponent, Subhas Chandra Bose, and India's Struggle Against Empire, and 100 Horizons, the Indian Ocean in the Age of Global Empire. In 100 Horizons, Bose crosses area studies and disciplinary frontiers as he bridges the domains of political economy and culture. He was a recipient of Guggenheim Fellowship in 1997. Bose is currently writing a book titled Asia After Europe, Decline and Rise of a Continent, and working as a general editor on the Cambridge History of Indian Ocean. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the seminar.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Aryabhatta College and Professor Satish Jha in particular for inviting me to join you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
That's very good. I'm going to try and share my screen in order to show you some pictures, if that's possible. Let me see whether I'm technically adept enough to do so.
So from here, I hand over the session to our chair and discussant, Dr. Tarang Kapoor and Professor Ashok Acharya.
Yes, sir, you may try, and we are waiting for you to. Yes.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, very much.
Okay, very good. Right. Delighted to be with you. In her book, Netaji, my mother, Krishna Bose, has a fascinating chapter on Muhammad Zaman Kiani, the commander of the 1st Division of the Azad Hind Fauj. 3 of the brigades of this division had been named by Netaji after Gandhi, Nehru, and Azad. It was the Gandhi Brigade, commanded by Inayat Jan Kiani, Muhammad Zaman's cousin, that fought heroically in 1944 against tremendous odds in the battlefields of Manipur around Imphal. In the winter of 1945-1946, Mahatma Gandhi used to visit the INA prisoners in Delhi. Krishna Bose writes, drawing on M.Z. Kiani's memoir, Gandhiji liked to banter with Inayat Kiani, the Gandhi Brigade's commander. He showed mock displeasure at his creed of non-violence having been disregarded, yet one could detect he felt flattered that a fighting formation had been named after him. M.Z. Kiani felt gratified when Mahatma Gandhi placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "Aap to hamare afsar hai." The arrival in February 1938 of a revolutionary leader from Bengal to preside over the 51st session of the Indian National Congress in Gujarat, the home province of the Apostle of Nonviolence, had carried powerful symbolic meaning. It represented the meeting of 2 generations and the merging of 2 strands of the anti-colonial movement that had run in parallel but had sometimes been at odds with each other. Gandhi and Bose, in earnest conversation on the dais at the plenary session of the Congress, warmed the hearts of millions of Indians looking forward to a united nationalist stand against the British Raj. The saint's holiness had to be complemented by the warrior's sword, as Aurobindo Ghosh had argued 3 decades ago in the pursuit of justice and righteousness. What exactly had Aurobindo argued in defense of the ethics of armed struggle? A subject nation had to make its choice about its method of resistance by taking account of the circumstances of its servitude. And Indian circumstances indicated passive resistance to be the correct path. While anticipating many elements of Mahatma Gandhi's methods, Aurobindo argued from a different ethical standpoint. He was not prepared to regard other methods as, in all circumstances, criminal and unjustified. It is the common habit of established governments, and especially those which are themselves oppressors, he wrote, to brand all violent methods in subject peoples and communities as criminal and wicked. The refusal to listen to, quote, the cant of the oppressor, unquote, attempting to lay a moral as well as a legal ban on any attempt to answer violence by violence, had the approval of, quote, the general conscience of humanity, unquote. Passive resistance could turn into a battle in which the morality of war ruled supreme. In those situations, to shrink from bloodshed and violence deserved as severe a rebuke as Sri Krishna addressed to Arjuna. Subhas met Mahatma Gandhi for the first time in 1921. After resigning from the Indian civil service, he had set sail for India. He landed in Bombay on July 16th, 1921, and rushed to see Gandhi the same afternoon. At Mani Bhavan, his usual place of stay in Bombay, the Mahatma sat in the middle of a large room decorated with Indian carpets. He was surrounded by some of his closest followers, who all wore Indian garments made of khadi. Feeling somewhat out of place, Subhas opened the conversation by apologizing for his European attire. He was soon put at ease by the Mahatma's characteristic hearty smile and warm indulgence. The eager and impatient young recruit bombarded the leader, more than double his age, with a series of insistent questions. How would the movement of nonviolent non-cooperation that Gandhi had been spearheading since 1920 accelerate in stages towards its climax in the non-payment of taxes to the government? How could that and civil disobedience compel the foreign rulers to concede Indian freedom? How would Gandhi fulfill his promise to the people of delivering Swaraj within 1 year? 7 years later, at the open session of the Calcutta Congress, Subhas sponsored an amendment demanding complete independence instead of dominion status in opposition to Mahatma Gandhi. He simply did not believe that there was any reasonable chance of the British granting dominion status within 12 months, as was demanded in the main resolution. Gandhi promised that if the year 1929 did not bring dominion home rule, he would himself become an independence wala. Subhas played an important part in Gandhi's civil disobedience movement of the early 1930s. Upon his release from prison in March 1931, he rushed to Bombay to meet Gandhi and was satisfied that the leader had not diluted his stand on independence. Subhas continued his talks as he traveled by train with the Mahatma from Bombay to Delhi and saw for himself from the ovation at wayside stations that Gandhi was at the zenith of his popularity. Once sent into forced European exile in 1933, Subhas was fortunate to find a kindred spirit from Gujarat convalescing like him in a Viennese sanatorium. This was Vithalbhai Patel, a leader of the Swaraj Party, founded by Bose's late mentor, Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru. Vithalbhai's younger brother, Vallabhbhai, was a loyal lieutenant of Gandhi in Gujarat, but it was the rebellious spirit of the young man from Bengal that captured Vithalbhai's imagination. Subhas Chandra Bose received an invitation to preside over the Third Indian Political Conference in London on June 10, 1933. Denied permission to visit the imperial metropolis, his presidential address on the anti-imperialist struggle and Samyavada to the London gathering had to be read in absentia. It contained both an appreciation and a critique of Gandhian Satyagraha between 1920 and 1933. Subhas accepted that Mahatma Gandhi had opted for the correct method of struggle, that is non-violent non-cooperation, in 1920, and had successfully roused the entire country. He went on to enunciate his own ideal of Samyavada. Attracted by European political experiments in socialism, he nevertheless preferred to use the old Buddhist Indian term to articulate his ideology of socialism suited to Indian conditions, one that invoked equality in an atmosphere of balance and harmony. I shall probably be elected the president of the Indian National Congress early next year, Subhas wrote in a private letter on September 9, 1937. The elections take place early in January 1938. Gandhi had clearly broached the subject with him by this time. A Gandhian connection to Bose during the summer of 1937 was provided by Miraben, or Madeleine Slade, the Mahatma's English disciple, who spent 2 months in Dalhousie as a guest of the Dharmaveers, whom you see in this picture, at the same time as Subhas. In late October 1937, the Bose brothers, Sharat and Subhas, were the cynosure of the anti-colonial movement as the top leadership of the Indian National Congress gathered in Calcutta. The entire top floor of Sharat Bose's home at 1 Woodburn Park was given over to Mahatma Gandhi and his entourage. The large terrace was used for Gandhi's prayer meetings. My father, Shishir Kumar Bose, has beautifully described the scene in his book, Subhas and Sharat. The music in Calcutta had an eclectic range with the presence of Dilip Kumar Roy and the young sensation Uma Basu, whom Gandhi described as the Nightingale of India. Dilip had often sung devotional and patriotic songs in this house, and the Bose brothers had listened with tears flowing down their cheeks. For Mahatma Gandhi one evening, he sang Abide With Me and other English prayer music. The Mahatma was deeply moved. With Gandhi, Nehru, and Bose present in the house, the residential mansion was transformed during the Congress meeting into a public place, with throngs gathered outside and forcing their way inside, seeking to catch a glimpse of their beloved leaders. The question of Bengali political detainees, some of whom had resorted to revolutionary violence, was an explosive political matter that had to be addressed by the Congress leadership. Gandhi's exertions made him very ill with high blood pressure on November 1st. A concerned Rabindranath Tagore came to visit. He was quite frail himself and had to be carried upstairs in a chair by Sharat, Subhas, Jawaharlal, and Gandhiji's secretary Mahadev Desai to see the Mahatma. It was utterly impossible for me to think of myself in Calcutta when Gandhiji was there, Subhas Chandra Bose wrote, especially after his own collapse on the 1st of November, because we had invited him to tackle the case of about 2,000 imprisoned detainees and political prisoners. By this time, Gandhi had decided that there really was no one other than Subhas who deserved to become the next president of the Indian National Congress. He encouraged the stormy petrel of Indian politics to take a break in Europe before taking up his onerous responsibility in January 1938. After crossing the breadth of the subcontinent from east to west on February 11th to 13th, Subhas Chandra Bose alighted from the train at Bardoli, which had become a storm center of peasant agitation in Gujarat from the late 1920s. From there, he traveled by car to Haripura before being carried in a ceremonial chariot to the temporary city named Vithalnagar that had been constructed to host the Congress session. The public and private spaces of the Congress venue were embellished with a couple of hundred painted posters depicting Indian rural life, as many as 86 by the famous painter Nandalal Bose. This was a creative display of the popular culture of mass nationalism. Following the pot style, Nandalal remembered, we did a large number of paintings and hung them everywhere, on the main entrance, inside the volunteers' camps, even in the rooms meant for Bapuji and Subhash Babu, the president. On reaching Vithalnagar, Bose hoisted the Indian tricolour flag and proclaimed, there is no power on earth that can keep India enslaved anymore. India shall be free. As Congress president, Subhas tried hard to work in cooperation with Gandhiji and sought to carry the Congress Working Committee with him on important matters. Congress participation in coalition governments in the Muslim-majority provinces, in Bose's opinion, would strengthen the party in speaking or negotiating with the British. He spelled out to Gandhi what he saw as the need of the hour in clear terms. While endeavoring to bring about a coalition ministry in the remaining 3 provinces, Congress already had ministries in 8 out of the 11 provinces, we should lose no time in announcing our decision on the various Hindu-Muslim problems that would have come up for discussion if negotiations had taken place between the Congress and the Muslim League. Simultaneously, we should hold an enquiry into the grievances of the Muslims against the Congress governments. These 2 steps will help to satisfy reasonable Muslims that we are anxious to understand their complaints and to remedy them as far as humanly possible. A proposal to conduct an enquiry into the conduct of Congress ministries in the Hindu-majority provinces was a red rag to the right wing of the party, comfortably enjoying the fruits of office. Bose's approach to addressing the intertwined challenges to the construction of an all-India nationalism presented by affiliations of religious community and linguistic region was significantly different and substantially more generous than that of most others among the Congress leadership. The democratic verdict of the delegates from the provinces, after an unprecedented electoral contest, was delivered on January 29, 1939. As was to be expected, Bengal had voted decisively for Bose, while Gujarat and Andhra had gone Sitaramaya's way. Among the major provinces, Subhas Chandra Bose had carried the United Provinces, Punjab and Assam in the north, and Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu in the south. The regional spread of his support was impressive. For the first time in 2 decades, Gandhi's authority had been challenged within the Indian National Congress. It will always be my aim and object, Subhas promised, to try and win his confidence, for the simple reason that it will be a tragic thing for me if I succeed in winning the confidence of other people, but fail to win the confidence of India's greatest man. The right wing of the Congress struck a calculated political blow at Tripuri in their campaign to avenge their defeat in the presidential election. They brought a resolution moved by Govind Ballabh Pant, the Congress Premier of the United Provinces, that the Congress executive should command Gandhiji's implicit confidence and requests the President to nominate the working committee in accordance with the wishes of Gandhiji. Once it was clear that an impasse had been reached, Bose submitted his resignation as Congress President in an entirely helpful spirit at the meeting of the All India Congress Committee on April 29, 1939. Bose's conduct won the approbation of no less a figure than Rabindranath Tagore, who sent a warm message. The dignity and forbearance which you have shown in the midst of a most aggravating situation has won my admiration and confidence in your leadership. The same perfect decorum has still to be maintained by Bengal for the sake of her own self-respect, and thereby to help turn your apparent defeat into a permanent victory. During the war crisis that erupted in September 1939, the rest of the Congress leadership behaved like His Majesty's opposition. Having shed all inhibitions of colonial subjecthood, Subhas Chandra Bose stood forth as His Majesty's opponent. While Subhas was kept under close police watch in his home at 38/2 Elgin Road, following his hunger strike in jail, not even the letters he exchanged with Mahatma Gandhi could evade the prying eyes of the colonial state. On December 23, 1940, Bose wrote to Gandhi offering his unconditional support to any movement the Mahatma might lead in the cause of India's independence. You are irrepressible, whether ill or well, Bapu wrote to his rebellious son on December 29, 1940. Do get well before going in for fireworks. On January 3, 1941, the government censors opened and read this letter before delivering it. Little did they know that the rebel had already completed preparations for his fireworks and was simply waiting for the right moment to light the fuse. On the night of January 16, 17, 1941, Subhas escaped from Calcutta, driven in a German-made Wanderer car by his young nephew, Shishir. By 1942, Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose had a shared perspective on the war. Even though Bose had failed to persuade Gandhi to issue an ultimatum to the British in 1939, the British debacle at the hands of the Japanese in Southeast Asia emboldened the Mahatma to prepare for a final showdown with the British Raj. He was confident of his ability to negotiate with the Japanese, who would have no reason to enter India if it was rid of the British presence. In the spring of 1942, the apostle of nonviolence was even prepared to take, quote, the risk of violence to end the great calamity of slavery, unquote. Maulana Azad found that Subhas Bose's escape to Germany had made a great impression on Gandhiji. He had not formally approved many of Bose's actions, Azad explained, but now I found a change in his outlook. Many of his remarks convinced me that he admired the courage and resourcefulness Subhas Bose had displayed in making his escape from India. His admiration for Subhas Bose unconsciously colored his view about the whole war situation. With World War II raging across Europe and Asia, an American journalist named Louis Fisher had come to see Mahatma Gandhi in Sevagram in early June 1942. The young American was puzzled by the Indian reluctance to line up unambiguously on the side of the Allies against the Axis powers. There were powerful elements of fascism in British rule, Gandhi told his interlocutor, and these were the elements Indians encountered on a daily basis. Your president, Gandhi continued, talks about the 4 freedoms. Do they include the freedom to be free? We are asked to fight for democracy in Germany, Italy, and Japan. How can we, when we haven't got it ourselves? Fisher asked Gandhi about Bose in the course of their conversations. In his response, Gandhi described Subhas Chandra Bose as a patriot of patriots, albeit misguided. What Fisher learned about Bose from Khurshid Ben, granddaughter of Dadabhai Nauroji, who was deputed by Gandhiji to take care of his guest, was even more revealing. If Bose entered India at the head of an Indian army, Khurshid Ben told Fisher, he could rally the whole country. Bose, according to this feisty 40-year-old woman, was, quote, more popular than Nehru and in certain circumstances had a stronger appeal than Gandhi, unquote. The historical significance of Netaji's submarine voyage from Europe to Asia that began on February 9, 1943, is underscored by the British response to another crucial development in India on the same day. This was the commencement of Mahatma Gandhi's fast that was to keep Indians on tenterhooks for 3 weeks. The British cabinet had decided that if Gandhi fasted, he would be allowed to die. Flush with the victories at El Alamein and Stalingrad, Churchill was of the clear opinion that, quote, this hour of triumph everywhere in the world was not the time to crawl before a miserable old man who had always been our enemy, unquote. In the event of Gandhiji's death, Linlithgow expected, quote, 6 months unpleasantness, steadily declining in volume, little or nothing at the end of it, unquote. Linlithgow thanked Churchill for refusing to yield to, quote, the world's most successful humbug who was engaged in a wicked system of blackmail and terror, unquote. Gandhiji being accused of terror. At a time when the Quit India movement was nearly crushed and the Mahatma was being treated with scant respect, Netaji was showing grit and a determination to fight the colonial masters. On the Mahatma's 74th birthday, on October 2nd, 1943, Netaji made a broadcast from Bangkok describing Gandhiji's contributions to the Indian struggle as unique and unparalleled. Gandhi was at this time languishing in British detention. No single man could have achieved more, Bose said in his eulogy, in one single lifetime under similar circumstances. So on 2nd October 1943, no single man could have achieved more in one single lifetime under similar circumstances. The lesson to be learned was that Indians in Southeast Asia, quote, should form one common blood brotherhood for the achievement of Purna Swaraj for India, unquote. Bose's and Gandhi's discourse on unity, sanctified by the fire of sacrificial patriotism, relied more on the language of blood than on the language of rights, even though there was room for both in their formulations. Gandhi's call in 1942 that rivers of blood must flow to pay the price of freedom was not qualitatively different from Netaji's similar exhortations in 1943. However, it was the shedding of Indian blood as the price of freedom that they were both talking about, rather than the spilling of the blood of their enemies. The first division of Netaji's Azad Hind Fauj in Southeast Asia was organized, as I mentioned at the outset, in 3 regiments or brigades named after Gandhi, Nehru, and Azad, in a conscious effort to make common cause with the struggle at home. Jai Hind was chosen by Netaji from the very outset as the common greeting or salutation when Indians met one another. A simple Hindustani translation of Rabindranath Tagore's song, Janagana Mano Adhinayaka Jaya He, became the national anthem. Just as the 3 battalions of the INA's Gandhi Brigade, commanded by Inayat Kiani, started arriving in Burma from Malaya, Netaji received news that Kasturba had died in Pune while in British custody. In a moving broadcast from Rangoon, Netaji paid a tribute to the, quote, great lady who was a mother to the Indian people, unquote. Once the Mahatma was released from prison in India, Netaji made a lengthy radio address to him. Netaji offered the most detailed justification of his course of action to wage an armed struggle of liberation during the Second World War. He lauded the Mahatma once more for bravely sponsoring the Quit India resolution. The mission of the Azad Hind government he had set up would be over once India became free. The Indian people will then choose their form of government and decide who should be in charge of that government. He and his co-workers regarded themselves as servants of the Indian people. Freedom of their motherland was the only reward they sought in return for their suffering and sacrifice. S.A. Iyer observed Netaji intently in the studio as he prepared to deliver the last line of his address. "Father of our nation," he began. His voice turned hoarse, then quivered, and a solemn look came over his face. His throat cleared, and the words came out clear and strong. "In this holy war for India's liberation," and then a pause, a lowering of the pitch, and in a tone of supplication, "We ask for your blessings and good wishes." In December 1945, the Mahatma paid homage to his rebellious son Subhas in the bedroom of the Elgin Road home from where he had made his great escape in 1941. Gandhiji was in Medinipur on January 3rd, 1946, when news came that the Red Fort Three, Saigal Dhillon and Shahnawaz, who had been sentenced to deportation for life on December 31st, 1945, had been released. On February 10th, 1946, he decided to revive his journal, Harijan, after a gap of 3.5 years. One of his first articles, published on February 12th, addressed the question of unity. Netaji's name, Gandhi wrote, is one to conjure with. His patriotism is second to none. His bravery shines through all his actions. He aimed high but failed, but who has not failed? Ours is to aim high and to aim well. The lesson that Netaji and his army brings to us is one of self-sacrifice, unity irrespective of class and community, and discipline. Netaji Gandhi told military men who came to visit him in Uruli Kanchan in March 1946, had, quote, rendered a signal service to India by giving the Indian soldier a new vision and a new ideal, unquote. In fact, that was the sole purpose of Netaji going abroad during the Second World War, to give the Indian soldier a new vision and a new ideal. They were the ones who had been kept insulated by the British from the swirling currents of mass discontent and resistance from 1919-1920 onwards. The Mahatma initially harbored a hope that Netaji would return to join him in the work for unity. On March 30th, 1946, Gandhi explained in the Harijan his earlier feeling that Netaji could not leave us until his dreams of Swaraj had been fulfilled. To lend strength to this feeling, he added, was the knowledge of Netaji's great ability to hoodwink his enemies and even the world for the sake of his cherished goal. His instinct had suggested to him that Netaji was alive. He now could no longer rely on such unsupported feeling, as there was strong evidence to counteract the feeling. In the face of these proofs, the Mahatma wrote, I appeal to everyone to forget what I have said, and believing in the evidence before them, to reconcile themselves to the fact that Netaji has left us. All man's ingenuity is as nothing before the might of the one God. He alone is truth, and nothing else stands. The ideal of unity that Netaji had instilled in his followers remained alive. On his return to Delhi in early April 1946, Gandhiji visited INA prisoners in the Kabul lines and the Red Fort. He was told that they had never felt any distinction of creed or religion in the INA. But here we are faced with Hindu tea and Muslim tea, they complained. Why do you suffer it? Gandhi asked. No, we don't, they said. We mix Hindu tea and Muslim tea exactly half and half, and then serve. The same with food. That is very good, exclaimed Gandhiji, laughing. On his arrival in East Bengal in November 1946, Gandhiji fondly remembered his first visit to this region in the company of the Ali brothers during the non-cooperation movement. I claim to be an Indian, he asserted, and therefore a Bengali, even as I am a Gujarati. Bengal had produced not just Tagore and Bankim, but also, as he put it, the heroes of the Chittagong Armory raid, however misguided their action might have been in my eyes. He could not understand how there could be cowardice in a province with that lineage. Bengal might still solve the problem facing all of India. Based in remote Noakhali, Gandhiji consistently argued in favor of provincial rights. He admitted that Subhas Bose had been right in contending in 1939 that Assam was a special case and that the Gopinath Bordoloi ministry should not resign along with the other provincial governments. We look to the Congress, Gandhi pointed out, and then we feel that if we do not follow it slavishly, something will go wrong with it. I have said that not only a province, but even an individual can rebel against the Congress, and by doing so, save it. The Mahatma had come a long way from imposing the discipline of the High Command on provincial units. Between January 7th and March 2nd, 1947, Mahatma Gandhi undertook a 116-mile pilgrimage on foot through 47 villages of Noakhali and Tipperah. The cause of communal riots, he bluntly said, was the idiocy of both the communities. At Daulat, on January 23rd, the Chaudharis of the village gifted him the plot of land on which his prayer meeting was held. He was glad that on the auspicious birthday of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, he had received this gift and had the privilege of staying at the home of a scheduled caste friend, Rajmohan Mali. He reminded his audience that Netaji was an Indian first and last, and that he fired all under him with the same zeal, so that they forgot in his presence all distinctions and acted as one man. Subhas had, Gandhi said, and I quote him, in his life verified the saying of Tulsidas that all becomes right for the brave. Once again, the question of bravery. Between May 9th and May 14th, 1947, in Shodhpur, Gandhiji explored the possibility of keeping Bengal united in a series of interviews with Sharat Chandra Bose, Abul Hashim, and Hussain Shahid Sohrawardy. Having heard that the plan for a united sovereign Bengal had received Gandhi's blessings, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee rushed to Shodhpur on May 13th. Gandhi wanted Shyama Prasad to evaluate the scheme on its merits. An admission that Bengali Hindus and Bengali Mussalmans were one, Gandhi told the Mahasabha leader, would really be a severe blow against the two-nation theory of the League. Gandhi was said to have lamented in 1947 that all his yes men, including Patel and Nehru, had turned into his no men. As the partitioner's axe was about to fall, the Mahatma may have missed the rebellious son whom he had cast aside in 1934 in favor of the more obedient ones. Gandhi stood as a tragic, lonely figure during the communal Holocaust that accompanied partition. The saint and the warrior acting in concert may have had a better chance of averting the catastrophe that engulfed the subcontinent in 1947. But that was not to be. Once August 15th, 1947 was set as the date for independence, Gandhiji expressed his desire to spend that day in Noakhali. He did, however, take a detour to Kashmir and Punjab in early August. At Srinagar, he made clear his view that the future of Kashmir should be decided by the will of the Kashmiris. Once he reached Bengal, he abandoned his plan of going to Noakhali on August 11th to work for the return of sanity to Calcutta, which he described as this premier city of India. Ignoring the celebrations in New Delhi, Gandhi chose to spend Independence Day fasting and praying with those who were poor and obscure. The Information and Broadcasting Department of the Government of India asked him for a message. The father of our nation simply said that he had run dry. Peace and camaraderie reigned in Calcutta on August 15, 1947. In an editorial titled Miracle or Accident, on August 16th, Gandhi narrated how Hindus were taken to masjids and Muslims to mandirs at the dawn of freedom, and both communities chanted Jai Hind in unison. It was neither miracle nor accident, but the willingness of human beings to dance to God's tune. We have drunk the poison of mutual hatred, Gandhi wrote, and so this nectar of fraternization tastes all the sweeter, and the sweetness should never wear out. The final week of Mahatma's life was rich with symbolism, redolent of India's unity. On January 23rd, 1948, Gandhi was very glad to take note of Subhas's birthday, even though he generally did not remember such dates, and, quote, the deceased patriot believed in violence, unquote, while he was wedded to non-violence. Subhas, according to the Mahatma, knew no provincialism nor communal differences, and, quote, had in his brave army men and women drawn from all over India without distinction, and evoked affection and loyalty, which very few have been able to evoke, unquote. A lawyer friend had requested Gandhi for a good definition of Hinduism. He did not have any, but suggested that Hinduism regarded all religions as worthy of all respect. Subhas Bose, according to him, was such a Hindu, and so in memory of that great patriot, he called upon his countrymen to cleanse their hearts of all communal bitterness. January 26th was Independence Day for Gandhi's generation. Let us permit ourselves to hope, he said on that occasion, that though geographically and politically India is divided into two, at heart we shall ever be friends and brothers, helping and respecting one another, and be one for the outside world. A 17-year-old girl was attending an interregional and intercaste wedding of a Bengali bride and a Malayali groom in Calcutta on the evening of January 30th, 1948, when she heard the stunning news that Gandhiji had been shot dead. She tried to persuade herself, my mother wrote later, that it must be a false rumor. A pall of gloom slowly descended on the gathering, and the guests quietly departed. Returning home, she heard the radio playing the song Shomukhe Shanti Parabar as the great soul began his journey across the ocean of peace. Sharat Bose loved English literature and Shakespeare as much as he had hated British rule. On receiving the heartrending news that the Mahatma was no more, he remarked wistfully, when comes such another? He might have added, if ever another. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Professor Bose. That was a very moving account in our troubled times. It's very heartening to hear the complementarity of the contrasting styles of two different leaders, Gandhi and Bose. And of course, also two different frameworks of political judgment that both Gandhi and Bose had, which had many, many overlaps also. Probably the country would have been a lot different if, both of them, rang in the freedom together and on the same platform, but those are many ifs and buts, and we have missed many of them. So the floor is now open to questions, but we will begin with, we have amongst us our discussant, Dr. Tarang Kapoor, and after her, we will, invite questions from the floor. Yeah, Tarang.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Professor. That was a very moving account indeed. In fact, towards the end, when you were discussing about the assassination of Mahatma, I was literally transported to some other realm, and I did not expect it to be such a transforming experience. And personally speaking, as my knowledge about Subhas Chandra Bose and Gandhi's opposition to each other is somehow more. I have read more about it in comparison to this kind of appreciation and acceptance of and mutual admiration for each other. So the account has been quite revealing, and I'm sure everybody here is going back with a lot of detailed knowledge about this relationship. Initially, when I read the topic of your talk about the ethics of war and the ethics of armed struggle, it sounded very oxymoronish to me. I work in the area of ethics, and somehow I've always been perplexed with this particular articulation about ethics of war. So I would like to gather your thoughts on that when you comment on this, please do. And one thing we were discussing in the last session was about Gandhi, whether Gandhi was a very pragmatic or consequentialist thinker, in the sense that when in the context of him allowing India, not allowing, actually agreeing to India joining the British forces in Second World War. So here is a person who is talking about non-violence, is a firm supporter of non-violence, sole force, and he says that violence cannot bring any good, but he is in support of helping Britishers. So there comes a contradiction, and I somehow saw that contradiction in his support to Subhas Chandra Bose's way of fighting or putting up a front to Britishers. So I just was wanting to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
Yes, well, Mahatma Gandhi had recruited soldiers to fight on the side of Britain during the First World War, but his position had changed at the time of the Second World War. I think we need to remember that. And the other point also to recognize is that, Mahatma Gandhi responded to the changing times in other ways too. For example, I mentioned how thrilled he was to hear that the soldiers of Netaji's Indian National Army dined together before they went to fight together for India's independence. But even in the early 1920s, he did not dine together with his closest political comrades, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, but he clearly changed his views on these subjects over a period of time. And that's something that that is important to remember. The other point to note is that I think Gandhi was very clear that nonviolence for him was a philosophy of life. He was committed to nonviolence, but he also has had multiple identities, as we all do. So he was also a political leader, a leader of the Indian National Congress from 1920. And so he was absolutely categorical that he had offered nonviolence to the Indian National Congress as a political strategy and not as a philosophy of life. And even Subhas Chandra Bose accepted that it was the correct strategic decision for basically a completely disarmed populace to fight against the mighty British Empire. But where they differed was that Subhas Chandra Bose, I think, had always felt that the final struggle would probably have to be an armed struggle. But moreover, he felt that, you know, the most corrosive aspect of colonial rule was that Indians helped to keep Indians in subjection. And not only that, soldiers of the British Indian Army were being deployed all across the British Empire to fight for imperial interests, to help in the perpetuation of the British Empire. And so he felt that he had to take advantage of the international war crisis in order to reach these soldiers and to instill in them a new loyalty to the cause of India, to replace the old loyalty to the British King Emperor. So that was, his thinking on the matter. But while I was not being perhaps as explicit, but I was trying to evoke the grounds on which Mahatma Gandhi decided to respect armed resistance. And it's probably more important to move away from the language of violence and non-violence and think in terms of armed struggle, because I mean, even Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was never in favor of violence as such, but he felt that sometimes you have to draw the sword if the enemy has already drawn the sword. Similar to what I quoted Aurobindo saying in his famous essay, The Doctrine of Passive Resistance, that the morality of war could take over if, in fact, it seemed necessary to resist an oppressor with armed force. But if you read Gandhiji closely in terms of the comments that he made on both Netaji and his Azad Hind Fauj between 1945 and 1947, and by the way, I was very struck that every reference to Netaji is in the form of a eulogy in that period from 1945 to January of 1948. But what he's picking out certain elements which he respects. One is, of course, just courage, bravery, citing Tulsidas, everything becomes right for the brave. The other is, in fact, respect for fellow beings. Just the fact he was seizing upon the greatest success of Netaji and the Indian National Army, and that was to unite all of the religious communities of India at a time when in India, the religious communities were being pitted against one another. And so he thought that this was a lesson to be learned. Of course, he also added that, if you achieved this grand unity only during the romance of fighting for freedom, that would not be enough. This is the spirit that must be rekindled even inside sort of India. So there were certain elements within that armed struggle for liberation that he found praiseworthy. And that is what he was, picking out when he was, assessing what had happened during the Second World War. And overall, I would say that, sometimes, and especially in Bengal, we make too much of the parting of ways in 1939. It was a very temporary parting of the ways. And by and large, we have to understand that these were two leaders who had great reverence and affection for each other that comes through in any overall assessment that we might undertake on their relationship.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I? Yeah, we will. But let me first ask, as I had promised, the students if they have any question. They haven't raised any. Students, do you have any question? Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So anyone who hasn't, okay. All right. Sure. I'm sorry, you have to be short.
Very short. Professor Bose, this is Gange Mukherjee. Taking you up from that point when of Gandhi's loneliness in Noakhali and afterwards, when he felt, when he used, as you said, he must have missed his rebellious son. You will recall that scholars such as Joya Chatterjee prominently have said that the lurch, she uses the word lurch, of Congress to the right wing, to the right wing in the late 30s, began with the eclipse of the Bose brothers from controlling the Congress party in Bengal after the Haripura Congress. And it is inconceivable that the high command of the Congress could have acted without Gandhi's consent. So knowing that the Bose brothers were the biggest obstacles to communalization of Congress or countenancing of any kind of majoritarianism in Congress in those decisive years, what propelled Gandhi still to dispense with Bose's leadership in favor of the group led by Bidhan Rai? Was it the agency of violence or was it something else? I believe it would be too petty a cause, some other cause. It must have been some noble ideal which came in the way. What was it exactly in your opinion?
Well, I think you are right in pointing out that the decision in 1939 to exclude the Bose brothers and take disciplinary action against them, not allowing them to hold any office within the Congress for 3 years, that was what was done, did contribute to basically the All India Congress losing influence in Bengal, because the bulk of the Bengal Congress stayed with the Bose brothers, and it was just what was called an ad hoc Congress, led by men like Bidhan Rai or Prafullo Ghosh, who did not really have the support of the congressmen and women of Bengal. I don't think the question of violence versus non-violence was a major issue in 1939. There were other questions which were more important. First of all, Subhas Chandra Bose had set up a national planning committee in 1938, and he had made Nehru the chairman of the committee. He, wanted to think in terms of planning for socialism. But interestingly, even there, Subhas Chandra Bose was careful to include J.C. Kumarappa, because he felt that those who wanted cottage industries or small industries should have a voice in the planning process. The other point which I think really upset Gandhians, if not Gandhi, like Vallabhbhai Patel, was that he was adamantly opposed to the federal part of the Government of India Act, which would have given too much influence to the autocratic princes and would have reduced the democratically elected representatives from British India to a permanent minority in a future federal assembly. And Subhash Bose was accused of casting an aspersion on the right wing of the Congress by saying that they seemed to be prepared to compromise on the federal part of the Government of India Act. So there were problems, there. The other issue, of course, was that, apart from these questions, Subhash Bose wanted to give the British a 6-month ultimatum and was wanting Gandhi to do that and launch another civil disobedience movement. He was not talking about an armed struggle, but another civil disobedience movement at that stage. And Gandhi's view was that the country was not ready for another All India movement just then in 1939. But as I mentioned, he decided to do so in 1942 when he thought that the time was right. But most important, going back to the question you're raising about Bengal, what upset Subhas Chandra Bose a great deal was that, he and Sharad Bose, were trying very hard to see whether a coalition could be formed with the Krishak Praja Party led by Fazlul Haq. They were also prepared to negotiate with the Muslim League to the extent that, already the Muslim League was drawing away people from the Krishak Praja Party because they felt that there had to be a Hindu-Muslim understanding in a province like Bengal. But Gandhiji was not allowing them to do so, and Subhas Chandra Bose was upset that Gandhiji was prepared to listen much more to Ghanashyam Das Birla or Nalini Ranjan Sarkar than to the Bose brothers' advice on what is good for Bengal. And what is interesting is that in the mid-40s, Gandhi was, almost accepting, just as he was saying that Subhash Bose was right about Assam. He said that don't get the Assam ministry to resign because he had his own reasons for wanting that to continue. So also, I think, at least Gandhi was coming around to the view that one must respect provincial rights, that one should not impose the High Command's writ in the way that he himself had done in 1939. So once again, you see a shift in Gandhiji's position, taking account of new developments.
Please pass on the microphone.
Thank you for that tour de force, Professor Bose. That was a wonderful talk. The question I have is about this distinction between violence and non-violence, which you, I think, very appropriately asked us to work ourselves away from. But to come back to something else, you said, even in your response now, that in 1942, Gandhi asked for preparedness for a bloody struggle of a certain kind, and so did Bose a year later, and both did not intend for the adversary to be the one whose blood should be shed. So I wondered if you want to say something about the place for force, even if Bose wanted another civil disobedience movement. What kind of pressure or force do these movements exercise? That as a stark similarity among those who want to use what we call violence and those who want to use what we call non-violence, just simply. So I just wondered if you had something more to say on that.
Well, first of all, if we look at our freedom struggle in the period after the First World War, even before, I would say, there was never a strict separation between the so-called non-violent strands and the strands which were prepared to utilize revolutionary violence. And I mean, just to give you an example, if you think of Gandhi's civil disobedience movement in the 1930s and consider Bengal, Medinipur was a storm center of Gandhian civil disobedience. But, I myself once read a document in the British archives where J.M. Petty, who was a district magistrate of Medinipur, was saying that we must have a few more shootings in Medinipur. Otherwise, collection of taxes would be very difficult. But then what happened was that there were a few more shootings, but not just shootings by the colonial police on unarmed villagers or peasants. There were 3 British district magistrates who were assassinated one after the other in Medinipur. And therefore, there was this close sort of intertwining of these two forces. Or if you think about Subhas Chandra Bose being, and James Sengupta and others being civil disobedience prisoners in jail in 1930. And there was a ferocious lathi charge on them in which Subhash Bose, among others, was badly injured. And what happened just after that was the attack on Writers' Building in December 1930. And the target was the Inspector General of Prisons, Simpson, the Binay Badul Dinesh's Revolutionary Act. So they were always intertwined. And in addition to asking for a more nuanced terminology, I'm also suggesting that we understand that these were not completely separate stands running on parallel lines, but they were intertwined in quite significant significant ways. Now, even Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose understood that there are times when you have to launch a mass movement. There could be times that you may have to negotiate. And I think his only problem with Mahatma Gandhi was that he felt that Gandhiji came to terms with the British at the wrong moments, when you could not, press your demands. And this he felt about 1922 and also 1931. And even though he knew how popular Gandhi was, once they reached Karachi, he was quite dismayed when the postponement of the Bhagat Singh execution, which he had hoped would become a permanent thing. The British decided to go ahead with the execution and so forth. So it's a question of what terms do you accept. But ultimately, I think that both of them, and perhaps Netaji was more emphatic in this, he had this notion that you cannot compromise on basic principles. And therefore, there must be an uncompromising struggle and resistance against British rule. And also, there must be no compromise on the question of majoritarianism, that members of all religious communities must be accorded equal respect and equal rights. And that feature of anti-compromise sometimes was regarded by Gandhi and the Gandhian leadership as being a little too adamant. And that is where some of the differences took place about the timing of mass movements, whether or not to utilize international forces to come to the aid of India's freedom struggle and so forth. But again, I think that particularly looking back from 2023, I think it's quite vital that we look at the commonalities and the overlaps quite as much as the differences, because when it comes to the issues that are really urgent in today's India, I think we need both Gandhi and Bose if we are to have an India where Hindus and Muslims, Punjabis and Tamils, men and women are deemed to be equal citizens.
All right, we have two more questions, and Dr. Rajendra Dayal, followed by Professor Douglas Allen. If you have a question, then so we will first go for Dr. Dayal, Rajendra Dayal.
So my question is not rising directly from your today's presentation, but more generally. I want to bring in another historical figure, Savarkar, especially on the question of armed struggle. So your views on how much you find there's an overlap and divergence between Bose and Savarkar on the question of armed struggle against the British rule, and the connect between Savarkar, Ras Bihari Bose and Subhash Bose, and what happens before and around the Quit India movement. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I think there was no overlap, and there was a complete contrast in the views of Bose and Savarkar on the question of armed struggle. And this comes through very clearly. Subhas Chandra Bose was imprisoned at the very beginning of July of 1940. And so he was really free to talk to other leaders of the various political organizations only up to June of 1940. And that's when he had his final face-to-face meeting with Mahatma Gandhi, which he described in great detail in his book, The Indian Struggle, the second part of which he wrote while he was in Germany. And he writes there that Gandhiji said that if India wins independence by your means, mine will be the first telegram of congratulations to reach you. He also met Muhammad Ali Jinnah as president of who was president of the Muslim League, and he urged him to join the Congress in a mass movement, and said that if that happens, he suggested what Gandhi would suggest in 1947, that he may well become the first prime minister of free India. And he also met Savarkar, and he was hugely disappointed, because what he wrote was that Savarkar was simply thinking of getting Hindus to join the British Indian Army in order to get military training, while Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose's objective was exactly the opposite. He wanted to undermine the loyalty of Indian soldiers to the British and form an army of liberation, an Indian national army, the Azad Hind Fauj that he did. And therefore, it was completely different. Now, Rashbihari Bose, of course, had been, away from India from 1915 onwards, and he probably only remembered the Savarkar of his anti-colonial phase, the very early part of the 20th century. And therefore, from Rashbihari Bose, there is a letter to Savarkar and so on, which I think is based on a wrong assessment of where Savarkar stood in the late 1930s. But as for Subhas Chandra Bose and Savarkar, their aims and objectives were completely different. I would say that Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose came close in their aims and ideology from certainly 1942 onwards. But Savarkar was simply, talking about Hindus getting military training in the British Indian Army, when in fact Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was aiming to, and successfully in the end, destroyed the ultimate instrument of colonial control in India and in the British Empire, that was the British Indian Army, by substituting for Indian soldiers a new loyalty to the cause of India's freedom.
All right, we have Professor Douglas Allen and also one more by Swami Syamananda. You will have to introduce yourself. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Bust. And I learned a lot, and I especially appreciated how you emphasized the complexity in Subhas Chandra Bose's position, and also M.K. Gandhi's position. And not only the complexity, but with changing contextual situations where often they responded in very different ways from some of their earlier positions. So I think that was very valuable. And I just want to say one quick comment from a point that was raised just before. For Gandhi, always, it's part of his ahimsa, being willing to absorb the suffering and even the violence can be transformative in terms of his nonviolent position. And I think the way you ended 2 questions ago, indicating that it was important today not to do the typical emphasizing differences, but to bring together the overlapping and unity, say, of Subhas Chandra Bose and Gandhi is particularly important today for what India faces and the world. And that was the very spirit with which I presented my keynote yesterday, identical spirit. So let me just say, I had a comment that I was going to offer, and then I was going to ask you a question. But my feeling is that in terms of the time, the late time today, and how it's not always necessary for me to speak. So I think, I'm willing to move on to the final speaker at the end.
Yeah. So can we take, Professor Bose, can we take the final question and then you can answer whichever. Yeah, Swami.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's just trying to open up, and for my understanding and for the understanding of others, we try to sort of look at violence in binary terms, violence and non-violence, as if they are both opposed to each other. Is there a world where you have some kind of physical or psychological, some kind of pain is inflicted, but it's done legally? Let's, for example, distinguish between hingsha and danda. So in Yoga Sastra, in our tradition, ahimsa is one of the cardinal virtues for yama of the, in yoga. At the same time, there is no bar on danda, because they are not contradictory to each other, because somebody has done some wrong action, because in order to protect, there is something called moral reward and punishment, but there's some way to prevent occurrence of a deviation which hurts other people. So you need to have a system of reward and punishment. Now, if you extend that a little, where the state is present, system is perfect, you could punish a guy and protect him from any further deviation in society. But do you have a right to protect yourself, self-defense? And in the process of self-defense, I'm just thinking about an innocent girl who is now facing a guy. Is pepper spray violence? We just have to think about it, because we are absolutizing the word violence, and we are trying to hold both Gandhi and Subhas Bose hostage to this restricted interpretation of what is violence. So I had this, I was talking to one of the traditional Acharyas. I said that you're talking about ahimsa, but then in the Brahma Sutras here, punishment is okay. He said, you are confused because you have not done the commentary properly. There is a difference between hingsha and danda. The Shastras are pretty clear about it. Now, that's why I appreciated Professor Bose when he mentioned about the word armed struggle, because if you look at the crime, conflict, and violence, the domain where a lot of development agencies are working, there are critical areas where you have small arms violence and you have state intervention. End of the day, this is a political science seminar. You're talking about a state. The moment you're talking about a state, you're talking about organized potential, the force to inflict violence on others, some kind of punishment, right? Otherwise, nobody is going to listen to you. So we are being able to talk about Gandhi's nonviolence because we have appointed people with guns at the borders, right? We have an army. We have policemen with guns flying on the streets. So our life is kind of organized with an element of threat, some sort of a threat to punish somebody. So once you accept this, then I think you need to open up the discussion on violence and not restrict it. Whether Gandhi was not violent, he supported First World War, he sent a nursing army to Boer War when he was in South Africa. All these things, I think we are kind of reducing it. It's too difficult. because that kind of and most of the people who criticize Gandhi's support for Gita, I'm just trying to bring it to a close. I'm sorry, I'm not hurting anybody, are non-vegetarians. Violence is part of their life. You have violent recipes every day, and you're talking about non-violence and criticizing Gandhi and Subhas Bose. Anyway, I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay. The last word, Professor Bose.
Yes, thank you very much. That is exactly what I was suggesting, that we have to move away, perhaps even undermine the binary of violence and non-violence. And I think you have drawn a very important distinction, after your talk with the Acharya on Hingsa and Danda. And again, while undermining the binary, we should also understand that, violence as a category also, needs to be deconstructed, because Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was very clear that not all violence was revolutionary violence, and that there were forms of violence to which he was absolutely opposed. Violence between religious communities, violence against women, and we must also draw a distinction between, the violence of the state and, the resort to revolutionary violence by those who might have been fighting against an oppressive state. So the only point that I would add to your very fascinating intervention is that you said that if the state were, operating perfectly, then there might in fact be scope for punishment against, crime, or somebody who's deviant, who's not, accepting the norms of society. But we also need to keep in view in, talking about Gandhi and Bose, is that, there are situations where, in fact, the state itself might be perpetrating a tyranny. And in the context of the British Raj in India, it was a colonial despotism. And therefore, the question arises there, is that what forms of resistance might be ethically justified against an oppressive state. And so there could be a perfect state, there could be an oppressive state. And in this instance, it's a question of, the empire, a colonial state, which is essentially a despotism depriving rights to colonials, rights of citizenship to colonial subjects. So these are contexts. I think Dr. Allen was also suggesting that we have to, the contextual part of our discussion is extremely important. So, that is, what I would sort of emphasize. But this has been a very enriching discussion, and I thank all of you for your questions and comments.
We just have one more question, just absolutely the last question. And yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you said that Bose was very disappointed with.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I am Dr. Koenraad Elst, all the way from Belgium. And I've written this book about Mahatma Gandhi's murder. No, but this is not about that subject. So you said that Bose was very disappointed with Savarkar's choice to join the British Army. But earlier today, from an earlier speaker, we heard that Gandhi made just exactly the same choice. And indeed, in the case of Gandhi, it is more consistent to make that choice than in the case of Savarkar, who had actually fought against the British. Gandhi, by contrast, had joined the British side in 3 wars already. And so in 1939, he also wanted to join the British war effort together with Savarkar, and he was overruled, as it was explained this morning, by the Congress leadership. So if he had given his view to Bose like Savarkar did, Bose would have to be equally disappointed. I put that to you.
Well, I think we need to be a bit more careful with the historical facts. You're right, of course, that Gandhi had recruited soldiers in the First World War. Even before that, there was a reference to what he was doing in South Africa at the time of the Boer War. Now, in 1939, Gandhi's position, and in fact, the position of the entire leadership of the then sort of Congress initially was to say that we may be prepared to cooperate, but we first want you to define your war aims. And since no satisfactory response was forthcoming from the British government and Linlithgow, the Viceroy in particular, it was in that context that the Congress decided to resign office in the various provinces and so forth. So if Gandhi was offering cooperation, it was conditional, at that stage. And I would say that, even though disciplinary action had been taken against Subhas Chandra Bose in August of 1939, as soon as the war broke out, Subhas Chandra Bose was invited as a special invitee to join the meeting of the Congress Working Committee in Wardha in September of 1939. And he put forth his views, which were different from the majority view of the Congress leadership, including Gandhi's. So to that extent, he might have been disappointed with Gandhi in 1939. But the reason why I'm saying that we have to be a bit careful in saying that Gandhi was prevented from cooperating with the war effort by the leadership of the Congress is that if you move forward a little in time to 1942, you find that it is Gandhi who is writing the most uncompromising draft resolution calling upon the British to quit India from March, April 1942 onwards. And in fact, you would find that it is a slightly watered down resolution, watered down by Nehru among others, which was eventually adopted in August of 1942. So in many ways, in 1942, Gandhi was the most radical among the Congress leaders in calling for the complete severance of the British connection. And it is no surprise that Subhas Chandra Bose, who was then outside India, warmly appreciated Mahatma Gandhi's position in 1942 on the Cripps mission, and then of course on the decision to launch the Quit India movement. His only disappointment, if I may use the word again, was that he couldn't travel to Asia quickly enough in order to coincide his armed struggle with the uprising of 1942. It took a while for him to work out that submarine voyage from Europe to Asia. But he wanted basically an armed thrust from outside to be a catalyst for the uprising that Gandhi had launched at home.
Thank you, Professor Bose. And for those of us who braved this evening until 8 p.m. have been amply rewarded by an excellent narrative on another bravery of years past. And we truly deserved it, and we have enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you so much, and for joining in and for spending some time with us. And I also take this opportunity to thank on behalf of the organizers for having, of course, invited me, first of all, and then for having spent time with each other on such fertile themes. Thank you. Is there any organizational?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would request the guests to please move to, am I audible? Move to the student activity room. We have a small cultural presentation by the students of Music Society for you all.
Thank you, Professor Bose. This is Satish.
Thank you.
On this side. And thanks a lot for sparing your valuable time this evening for India and must be the early morning for you. So thanks a lot, Professor Bose.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great pleasure.
Also, requesting if somebody finds a